Welcome to Mickey, Marvel, and More, Disney news, commentary, and opinion. From theme parks to Thanos and from Skywalker to Skyliner, my family and I will discuss it all. So let's go.
Please stand clear of the doors. Por favor, manténganse alejado de las puertas.
Hello, Mark here, and welcome to another fabulous episode of Mickey, Marvel, and More. Before we get started today, I wanted to take a couple of seconds to thank everybody. We have been receiving so much positive feedback on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all of our other socials, and I wanted to let you know that we really appreciate all of it. It's also just kind of great to know that people are enjoying our little dog and pony show here, and it really motivates us to make more and more content, or as my lovely wife Laura would like to point out, draw just a little bit more attention to myself. So thank you very much for that. We've also been receiving a lot of email from listeners with encouragement and some comments about our topics and stories. So I thought it might be fun every once in a while to reach into our mailbag and read one of them to you.
What message? The one you've just been playing. The one you're carrying inside your rusty innards.
Today's email comes from somebody who calls themselves Guybrush Threepwood. And they wrote in to add to the discussion that Zach and I were having in the family chat in the last episode about the state of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. First thing he says is he is very happy with our podcast and it has become his new favorite. I want to let you know, Guybrush, that we really appreciate that. He then goes on to make a couple of really good points that I hadn't thought of. First of all, he says that Marvel is guilty of ignoring a time-tested rule of storytelling. They're failing to let the audience catch their breath. In any great action-adventure film, a climactic action sequence will almost always be followed by a period of quiet where the audience can regroup, enjoy what's come before, and build anticipation for what's coming next. And he thinks that it would have been a really good idea if Marvel would have just gone quiet for a couple of years after Avengers Endgame and maybe given the audience a chance to build anticipation for what's coming next. You know what? That's a pretty fair point, and it would have been really interesting to see if they actually had the courage to do that. But most movie companies are like, okay, we got a popular thing. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. So it would have been brave for them to do that, and I think it would have been very interesting to see what might have happened. And his other point that he made, I very much wholeheartedly agree with as well. He says that he thinks that the problem is more producer-driven than it is necessarily writer-driven, as we were talking about. More so than any other studio, Marvel films are assembled by committee. That is so very true. And writer-directors are brought on to service the material and then move on. Basically, what he's saying here is that they bring in hired guns for the project that don't necessarily have a lot of knowledge about what's come before and what the plans are for afterward, and therefore the continuity they used to have going from project to project is just really kind of missing. And you know what? I can't argue with that. I think that is an absolutely valid point. Thank you so much, Guybrush, for all of your points. And anybody else who wants to write in and comment on any of our stories or our family chat, send us an email at mickeymarvelandmore, all one word, @gmail.com. And speaking of family chat, we have another great discussion planned for this episode. Laura and I are going to sit down and for the first of what will be a two-part discussion about planning a Disney theme park vacation. Part one in this episode, we're going to talk about how far in advance you need to start planning and lay out a timeline of sorts that maybe you can follow along and use in your planning. And in part two, in the following episode, we'll discuss the daily planning and managing of your time while you're there. So stick around because I have a feeling this is going to be a really fun discussion. But first, here's some news from in and around the Disneyverse.
To all who come to this happy place, welcome.
So a couple of days ago, Disney made a very interesting announcement regarding the Walt Disney World Resort in Florida. They announced that any guests staying on property at a Disney-owned hotel would receive, for free, entry to either Typhoon Lagoon or Blizzard Beach water parks on the day of their check-in. While it isn't particularly interesting that Disney made an announcement for a promotion, what is interesting about this particular one is the timing. Most of the time, Disney will make an announcement about a promotion that will go into effect in just a couple of months. For example, they might announce a free dining program for resort guests that'll happen over the summer, and they would make that announcement in the spring. This particular promotion doesn't go live until January 1st, 2025. That seems super far away, right? Well, it isn't if you understand their motivation. In 2025, Universal is going to open a brand new theme park called Epic Universe. So it looks like Disney is trying to get out in front of this one with a nice incentive. With the addition of Epic Universe, this brings Universal's theme park count up to 4 if you include their water park. The other 3 being Universal Studios, Universal Islands of Adventure, and Universal's Volcano Bay, which is the aforementioned water park. So it looks like the theme park wars in Orlando are just beginning. This could get very interesting. So we need to keep our eyes peeled to see what Disney pulls out of their magic hat in the coming months.
Not the man I knew 10 years ago.
It's not the years, it's the mileage.
Okay, this will be the first time we've talked about these two topics on the show. Indiana Jones and video games. But this definitely falls under the more category in Mickey, Marvel, and More. And Indiana Jones is one of my all-time favorite movie characters, and the franchise is one that I dearly love. I know this news story may be a little bit older, but I had a feeling that most of our listeners haven't heard about it. So in 2024, Bethesda Games and Lucasfilm are going to release a game called Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. I know, the title is silly, but the trailer they released for the game looks really, really good. This is going to be a Microsoft exclusive, so it will only be available on Xbox and PC. And this will be the first Indiana Jones video game released since 2011. Now, I personally haven't played an Indiana Jones game since the second Lego Indiana Jones game was released for the Wii, way back in 2009. The boys and I had a lot of fun with that one. This particular game will be set between Raiders and The Last Crusade in the Indy timeline. That way we don't have to talk about the Crystal Skull. Because the first rule of the Crystal Skull is you don't talk about the Crystal Skull. It looks like the gameplay will involve first and third person perspectives, as well as puzzle solving. Now look, even if you don't like gaming and don't want to play it, I still suggest you watch the trailer. We'll put the link for that in our show notes. Because the voice actor providing the voice for Indy is absolutely phenomenal. His name is Troy Baker, and he nails the younger Harrison Ford voice. Also, if I don't mention the fact that Baker voices the character Joel in the Last of Us video game series, my son Parker will be greatly disappointed. He always reminds me about that Last of Us fact. Always. So look for Indiana Jones and the Great Circle on store shelves and the Microsoft Game Store later on in 2024.
To all who come to this happy place, welcome.
So now we're going to bring you a story about a news story, sort of a Russian nesting doll of news. Don't say that we don't work hard for you here at Mickey, Marvel, and More. Okay, so here's the story. Disney is increasing park ticket prices for 2025. That's it. That's the news story. Is this really a big news story? Well, I don't think so. But every year, Disney increases ticket prices, and every year, every major network, news outlet, blogger, crazy old man on a street corner with a megaphone does a story about it, and they all act like Disney has done something wrong, or they're just evil. Let's be clear. Almost every big business increases prices for their products every year, and no one bats an eye. But as soon as Disney does it, it's big news. It's like they always have some sort of a big target on their back. I guess it's because Disney is geared towards families, maybe? I don't know. But other places geared towards families raise prices every year, and it never makes the news. We get it. Disney vacations can be expensive. Relatively and historically, they always have been. But everybody reports this story and says it's going to affect Disney park attendance. But newsflash, huh? You see what I did there? Newsflash, huh? Newsflash, it never does. As a matter of fact, it appears to us that park attendance has only increased in recent years. Now, sometimes it feels like there's never a slow time of year anymore there, especially at the Magic Kingdom and Walt Disney World. So can we all just agree that businesses increase prices every year, and just because Disney is geared towards families and they raise prices, it doesn't make them bad or evil for doing so? Please and thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are approaching our station at the entrance to Main Street, USA, gateway to the 7 theme lands of the Magic Kingdom.
Speaking of park attendance and going to Disney theme parks for vacations, people will often ask us, how far in advance should I plan? How far in advance should I do XYZ? Have I waited too long? Well, we're going to try to answer some of those questions today in the first of a 2-part discussion about planning for a Disney theme park trip. Today's discussion is going to focus on all the things you do beforehand. I'm going to bring in my wife, Laura, to join us. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
So, where do we start? What's the first step?
Sure. So what I tell most people is certainly the sooner in advance you can plan, the more options you're going to have in terms of hotel ability, room type. But I also tell people that 90 days in advance of your trip is generally a very doable and comfortable time to plan it. There's usually still a good amount of hotel availability, and that's still plenty of time to plan a very nice Disney trip. So at that 90-day mark, things that you need to consider are when exactly you want to go, what your budget is for the trip, give some thought to what kind of hotel you want to stay at. Do you want to stay at the park versus one of the Disney Good Neighbor hotels? Do you want to stay at the value level, moderate level, or deluxe level? Some of those sorts of considerations. And usually at the 90-day mark, you're going to have some availability in all of those hotel category types. Also at that 90-day mark, you're going to want to give some consideration to, are we driving to the parks? Are we flying to the parks? Because that's also going to be a big impact on your budget. Then I'd say once you've made those decisions and you've made your hotel reservations and any airline tickets that you need to purchase if you're flying, then your next big decision point's going to be at the 60-day mark. And that's when you can make your sit-down dining reservations. My advice to people when they are thinking about how many sit-down dining reservations that they are going to plan in a typical week-long Disney trip is don't plan too many. Of course, every family is different, and there are some people that the highlight of their vacation is the sit-down family dinner about once a day. But for us, it's really about maximizing all the experiences in the park. And so while we do put some sit-down dinners in a typical week-long vacation, we won't do one every day because there's just not enough time. The sit-down dinners really do eat up a good 2.5, sometimes 3 hours, depending on how big your dining party is and how busy the restaurant is.
Right.
Also at the 60-day mark, if you have somebody in your traveling party that needs a scooter or other mobility device, that's the time when you need to make a reservation for that. And also at the 60-day mark, hear me out, I think if you are somebody who is not very active or working out regularly, that's the time that you need to start working on your walking stamina.
Why are you looking me directly in the eyes as you say this? You need to get out and start walking, or when you get to Disney World, you're going to die.
All I'm saying is don't underestimate how much walking there is at Disney.
There is a lot.
There is a lot. And if you haven't been in a while, it hasn't changed. You're just older now. So if you're someone like me who sits behind a desk all day, I do make an effort in the 60 days prior to a Disney vacation to start going out every day and making sure that I'm walking and getting my steps in, because it really does make a difference in your stamina when you're at Disney and you're hot and there's a lot of walking and you're tired. It makes a difference.
You keep looking me directly in the eye. I feel like I haven't been doing enough.
All right, moving on.
Okay.
So,
hey, moving. See what you did there?
At the 45-day mark, that's kind of our next milestone in the timeline. That's a good time to sit down and just give some thought to what park you're going to go to on which day. And I know a lot of people will maybe decide what park they're going to go to on what day, and then make their table service reservations.
Right.
But for us, we kind of do it the opposite. We make our table service reservations first because sometimes there's limited availability and you maybe have to schedule those later in the trip when you can get them.
Right.
So we will plan our table service sit down dining first, and then we'll build our park days around that.
I will say that making restaurant reservations these days has become sort of a competition. So my advice when you're going to make these reservations is pick the last day of your trip first and make that your first shot at a sit down place that you want to go to, and start backing it up from there. Because that way you're more likely to hit the location you want without missing out.
Yep, that's good advice. So once you've kind of given some thought to which park you want to go to on what day, and we actually write it down and make a little calendar, and we include on there any table service reservations that we have in that little calendar. We will also give a little bit of thought to what we're doing for our other food options. And again, none of these things have to be in stone because you're on vacation. And so plans may change and that may be flexible, and that's fine. But I think it definitely helps to have a general plan in mind of what park you're going to go to on what day and where you're going to eat. So for us, for example, we tend to eat breakfast in our room every day. For us, that's really helpful to kind of people can take turns eating while other people are getting ready, and it helps us get out the door. And that way, when we get to the park, we can focus on getting to our ride and riding, and we're not scrambling around trying to figure out where are we going to eat breakfast because one person wants to go to Starbucks and another person wants to get bacon and eggs. We just have a little something in our room to get us going, and then we might then do an early lunch because we've had a fairly light breakfast from our room. So planning those kinds of things in advance, I think, is helpful. We also will give a little bit of thought to what quick service locations we may want to try at each park when we're there.
Well, yeah, I think that's really important because if you sort of have like a little list in like a notes app or even a handwritten note that you take with you, if you have an idea of the places you would like to eat at or places you've been to before that you know are good, that you enjoy, if you have those places in mind, you spend a lot less time while you're there trying to think, okay, this is what I'm going to eat. You don't have to worry about making those decisions on the fly, and it keeps you moving without having to stop down, everybody sit down and say, okay, where do you want to eat? Okay, where do you want to eat? I don't care. Where do you want to eat? If you have a list of them ready to go, you kind of avoid some of that, and it helps really save time.
Yeah, don't underestimate the decision fatigue that sets in on a Disney trip. You have so many little decisions to make every day, and the choices can be so overwhelming. It does help to kind of sit down in advance, plan out 2 or 3 different quick service restaurants that you want to be sure to try in each of the parks. And that really helps you focus in and say, okay, here's where we're going to eat for this meal, and helps eliminate trying to make that decision when you have a million other decisions that you're making that day.
Right.
Too.
And if you have a couple of places written down like that, you can see, well, there's a long line to play. Our first choice, let's go to the second choice instead. So you have that all ready to go in advance.
So next time on our timeline is about 30 days out. And 30 days out is when I typically start keeping a Disney trip countdown. You can do it even earlier than that, but 30 days, I think, is a really nice time to start doing that countdown. Traditionally, we've always kept a little chalkboard in our kitchen that one of our children updates every day with the countdown. And that's kind of a fun and exciting thing for everybody to look at as they're walking through the kitchen and see how close we are to a Disney trip. More recently, I've been keeping a countdown app on my phone, and I'll send a screenshot of the countdown to our family in their various locations. They can, follow along with me on the countdown. And that's really a fun way to anticipate an upcoming trip and adds a little bit of joy to your day when you know that you've got a Disney trip coming up soon.
And also reminds you of all the things you haven't done yet, and it's coming.
Yes, for those of us that are doing the planning, certainly that is letting us know that we need to get it in gear and get some of these other things done. Also at the 30-day mark, I like to do a packing list. Again, this is not a hard and fast packing list, but I think it's really helpful for me to sit down and think through, how many t-shirts does everybody need? How many pairs of socks? What else do we need to put on there? And I'll make the packing list and then I'll maybe think about it for a couple of days. And as I'm going through my morning routine, I may think, oh, I forgot to add this item that I use every day to the packing list. So I kind of let that sit for maybe a week and add other things to it as it occurs to me. The packing list, I think, also helps you remember things to bring, but also helps you narrow down what you really don't need to bring. Because when I've packed for other trips and not made a packing list, sometimes you have a tendency to, well, I don't know if I'm going to need this or not, so I'm just going to throw it in the bag in case I do. And then you've overpacked, and then you have to haul all that stuff around. And that's not helpful either.
Giving yourself far too many choices.
Right. So doing the packing list about 30 days out, I think is really helpful. The way we do our packing list is by person. So each person has a page on the packing list, and that helps me kind of think through, okay, what do I need? What does Mark need? What does Parker need? And each person has a page, and that helps me kind of organize. Then I'll also have a page for things that we want to pack in the car if we're driving. So pillows, blankets, if you have little ones, toys and books, car snacks, things like that.
I like toys and books. I'm not a little one.
Sure. Toys and books for kids of all ages, I guess. I'll also, as part of that packing list, make a food list. And I'll divide it up by food we want to take in the car and food that we want to have in our hotel room at the parks. Again, if you're driving. If we're flying, I might do that a little differently and do a grocery list for food delivery. There are all kinds of grocery delivery services that will deliver to your Disney hotel. And so if you're planning on having either breakfast items or snack items in your hotel room, you can have that food delivered and you don't have to try to bring it with you on an airplane. Also, at about the 30-day mark, I will give some thought to what kinds of activities we want to do in the car. For some people that are traveling to Disney by car, it's a shorter drive. For us, it's a longer drive.
Yeah, it's about the average. I think our average drive is about 13 hours.
Yeah. So it's a long time. We do it all in one day. And I find that the trip goes easier if you have some kind of a game or activity every couple of hours to keep people in the car sort of interested and engaged and all doing something together. Another thing that we've done in the past to keep things interesting in the car is having some new books or a new movie or a new game, something like that, that will keep the kids occupied and interested because it's something new.
To be clear, our children are much older now, but they still need to be entertained, it seems like.
Right. And just a little bit of planning of all of those things about 30 days out, I think really takes the pressure off. Again, you don't have to plan every minute, but just giving it a little bit of thought and having that stuff lined out really helps. Okay, now we're at 2 weeks out. And at 2 weeks out is when I start gathering up all the things that I've listed on my packing list and putting them in one spot. I'll also say at 2 weeks out, break in the new tennis shoes that you bought to take to Disney. Do not wait until you are in the park for your first day to break in those brand new tennis shoes. You need to do that about 2 weeks out and just make sure that you've walked around in them for a while, that they're a little bit broken in, and that they're going to be comfortable.
We want to avoid flipper boo-boo-tosis, which often happens with a new pair of shoes.
Yes. Then at 1 week out, I like to try to pack as much stuff as I can. So I try to go ahead and pack the suitcase, go through the packing list, make sure that I've gotten everything that I've listed packed away. If there's something that I haven't gotten yet, or I haven't been able to pack it because I'm still using it, I'll just mark it on the packing list so I know that that's a last minute item. Then we get to the day before the trip. The day before, we will shop for any food that we're taking along on the trip. I'll make any sandwiches or other food that we're going to eat in the car on the way down. The night before, we will make sure that we charge our devices. We put any travel items in the car that we can go ahead and pre-pack, and we'll go ahead and load the suitcases in the car so we don't have to do that in the morning. Then the morning of, we try to leave that with as few items left as possible. But you will need to make sure that you pack your cooler and any perishable food that you couldn't pack in the car the night before. Be sure to bring your kids. And we've learned from experience, if you're putting sleeping children in the car, make sure to bring their shoes.
Make sure they have their shoes on. We had the incident where we were driving along and Zach says, "Mommy, Parker doesn't have any shoes on."
And Parker did not have any shoes on. And so we had to make a little detour to buy Parker some shoes.
And you know how hard it is to find shoes at, 7 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday in the middle of nowhere, Kentucky?
Yeah. So anyway, so that's my countdown and my timeline for Disney trip planning.
All right.
And on our next family chat segment, we're going to pivot a little bit and talk about the little daily plans that you make once you're in the park that can make your Disney travel, your Disney day a little more easy.
All right. Well, we will see you then on the next segment of Family Chat on Mickey, Marvel, and More.
Okay, looking forward to it.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Mickey, Marvel, and More. Now, before we zippity-doo-dah out of here today, I cannot believe I just said that. Who writes this stuff, right? A big thank you goes out to my wife, Laura, for participating in our family chat with a sort of a by-the-numbers timeline for when and how to start planning before you go on a Disney theme park trip. Be sure to come back next time for part 2, where we will sit down and talk about timing and planning of your days while you're there visiting the parks. If you want more information about any of the things we talked about today, don't worry. All that information will be provided down in our show notes. And the notes also contain links to all of our socials. Make sure you drop by our pages, give us a follow, and maybe while you're there, how about a comment or two about some of the stories we talked about? And as always, you can drop us an email with questions, comments, or suggestions at Mickey, Marvel, and More, all one word, @gmail.com. If you enjoyed this episode, then my name is Mark, and this has been Mickey, Marvel, and More. If you didn't, well, my name is One Thumb Pete, and this has been Shop Class. We'll see you next time.